Alicia Collier literally made these absurd comments the other day, right before the deadline ran out. Being on the side with Unrivaled, I know what it takes to run a sustainable business. So I think if they find a model that makes that happen, they need to put people in place who can. And of course, the buzzword, the word that everybody really paid attention to was sustainable.
That word right there, sustainable. That single word just torpedoed the entire narrative. Nafisa Collier and Breonna Stewart have been building for months. Because here's what makes this so devastating. Collier just called Unrivaled a sustainable business model, while standing next to a league that's hemorrhaging viewers at a catastrophic rate. The WNBA averaged over 300,000 viewers during their playoff games last season. Unrivaled just pulled 110,000 on actual TNT, not True TV, the main channel. So let's be very clear about what we're watching unfold here. This isn't just bad ratings. This is a complete collapse of the leverage play that Collier and Stewart thought they had during CBA negotiations.
Now, did anybody expect any of these ratings to be WNBA-like? No, of course not. They never was going to be. But the epic drop-off in ratings at this point, look, we covered the ratings for Unrivaled last year. And they were bad then, but at least there were a lot of there were a lot of 140,000 viewers, 170,000 viewers, 190,000 viewers, maybe a 200,000 viewer. This is a titanic drop-off.
Look at those numbers again. 0.03 in the 18 to 49 demographic. That's 30,000 people in the advertising demographic that actually matters to networks. Both games combined pulled just over 200,000 total viewers on a Friday night. For context, the NBA pregame show that aired before these games drew 50,000 more viewers than the actual basketball. This matters because Unrivaled wasn't supposed to be some experimental side project. Collier and Stewart positioned this as a genuine alternative to the WNBA. They talked about it during CBA negotiations like they had options. Like players could walk away from the WNBA's offer and just play in this league instead. That rhetoric made sense when people thought Unrivaled might actually draw an audience. It sounds absurd now. Remember, this is year 2. The league had an entire offseason to build momentum, sign bigger names, and improve their product. Instead, viewership dropped off a cliff compared to last season's already underwhelming numbers.
That's bad. Boy, that's dog shit. That's not, you know what that's not? That's not sustainable. You know what this isn't? Leverage. This is not leverage at all. This is not leverage. So, literally, Breonna Stewart had to come out. She actually made comments about this. Nobody has been more attached to Unrivaled than New York Liberty star Breonna Stewart, who is a co-founder of the league, along with Collier.
And here's where the conflict of interest becomes impossible to ignore. Nafisa Collier is a co-founder of Unrivaled. She owns part of this league. She's also on the WNBA Players Union Committee negotiating the new CBA. So when she goes on record calling Unrivaled sustainable, while the WNBA needs to figure out their business model, she's not just offering analysis, she's protecting her investment while undermining the league that actually pays her salary. Breonna Stewart is in the exact same position. Co-founder of Unrivaled, VP on the Players Union Committee, and now she's out here doing damage control about ratings that she clearly knows are disastrous. She told the New York Post that people aren't used to seeing women's professional basketball at this time of year. That's the excuse. Unfamiliarity with the calendar. The WNBA just had their most watched season in decades. Caitlin Clark's games were pulling over 2 million viewers. The audience exists. They're just not showing up for Unrivaled.
Of the New York Post, quote, obviously want them to be consistently high, no matter if we play on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or Monday. And know that we have a space on our own here and in the league of sports, Stewart said. People aren't typically used to seeing women's professional basketball at this time of the year unless you're watching EuroLeague or something like that. So ratings is a huge one. Yeah. Look, in other words, Unrivaled success may come down to the sequel's viewership. Well, it always does. We talk about it all the time on this channel. Everybody brings up, and look.
Think about the position this puts the other WNBA players in. They're negotiating a new CBA with owners who just signed a $2.2 billion media rights deal. That's real money finally coming into the league after 28 years of losses. And right when players should have maximum leverage to get their share of that revenue, two of the most prominent union representatives are running a competing league that's proving women's basketball might not be the guaranteed ratings draw everyone claimed it was. Because that's what these Unrivaled numbers actually demonstrate. Strip away Caitlin Clark, and the audience shrinks dramatically. Angel Reese decided not to play in Unrivaled this season, and her absence is glaring. Say what you want about Reese, but her fans showed up. Without her and without Clark, you're left with a product that can't crack six figures on a major network. The WNBA's entire negotiating position with their new CBA rests on the argument that they've finally broken through to mainstream audiences. They can point to last season's ratings and merchandise sales as proof. But Unrivaled is accidentally running a controlled experiment that suggests maybe it was just one player driving those numbers.
They've already shown that they may be way too greedy in all this. I mean, what's the point of a new media rights deal if you're going to price out of it and still lose money? You just don't make the deal. I think these ratings are big. And they're big in the aspect of maybe we get these two, Collier and Stewart, to shut the bleep up when it comes to the CBA.
Now look at the broader implications here. Warner Brothers Discovery is paying to broadcast these games on TNT. They're not doing that out of charity. They expected some return on investment, some audience they could sell to advertisers. 100,000 viewers doesn't justify the production costs, the broadcast rights, or the promotional push they've given this league. What happens when WBD looks at these numbers and decides it's not worth continuing? Unrivaled's entire business model depends on media rights revenue. They're paying players $80,000 for 8 weeks of basketball. Those salaries don't fund themselves. If the broadcast deal falls apart because ratings can't justify the expense, the league folds. It's that simple. And that brings us back to sustainable. Collier used that word deliberately. She was taking a shot at the WNBA's financial history while propping up her own venture. But nothing about these ratings suggests Unrivaled can sustain itself beyond however long their initial investors are willing to absorb losses.
Nobody's playing anywhere. I mean, that's the thing. There's no alternative. If there's no league to come play, and look, these two games, what's even worse, these two games were on actual TNT. Not true TV, actual TNT. The NBA pre-game or post-game show, whatever that is, got 50,000 more viewers.
The timing of this collapse couldn't be worse for the players' union. WNBA owners are watching these Unrivaled ratings just like everyone else. And what they're learning is that the leverage players thought they had doesn't actually exist. You can't threaten to walk away and play in an alternative league when that league is pulling 1/10 the audience of WNBA regular season games. This fundamentally changes the CBA negotiation dynamic. Players were pushing for 60% of basketball-related income, citing the revenue split in the NBA. But NBA players have no alternative. There's no competing league they could jump to if negotiations break down. WNBA players tried to create that alternative with Unrivaled, and it's failing spectacularly in real time. So now what? Do Collier and Stewart double down on the sustainable business model rhetoric while their league circles the drain? Do they quietly back away from using Unrivaled as a negotiating chip? The problem is, they've already played that card. Owners know what they were trying to do, and owners now have concrete evidence it didn't work.
I told you guys, this league wasn't going to work out. And when the likes of, look, when Angel Reese decided she wasn't going, because look, this was a league that I will say this, her fans flocked to watch with her playing. She didn't bother to play. And I noticed that. Right away, I was like, oh, Angel's not playing?
Here's what makes this particularly awkward for Stewart. She went to the New York Post to address these ratings concerns, which means the numbers are bad enough that co-founders feel compelled to respond publicly. Her explanation was that people aren't used to seeing women's professional basketball in January. But that excuse falls apart under any scrutiny. College basketball happens in January. Women's college basketball has an established audience that tunes in during this exact time of year. If Unrivaled featured the biggest names in women's basketball playing high-level competitive games, the audience would find it. The issue isn't the calendar. The issue is the product doesn't feature the players casual fans actually want to watch. Caitlin Clark isn't playing. Angel Reese isn't playing. Those are the two names that drove mainstream interest in women's basketball last year. Without them, you're left with a league that appeals primarily to hardcore WNBA fans. And apparently, there aren't enough hardcore fans to justify a primetime slot on TNT.
Paige Beckers propping up the league. Boy, you're finding out she is zero draw. She is a zero draw. Tell me what you think. Can you and let's be real. Caitlin Clark was playing right now. Ratings be like 800,000, a million. Tell me what you think. Peace. I'm out.
So let's talk about what happens next. Because this isn't just about one league's bad ratings. This is about the entire economic model of professional women's basketball getting stress tested in real time, and the results are uncomfortable for everyone involved. The WNBA finally has legitimate media money coming in. $2.2 billion over 11 years means the league can actually operate profitably if they manage cost properly. But players are demanding a revenue split that might make profitability impossible, and they're doing it while their alternative league proves the audience might not be as large as they claimed. Unrivaled was supposed to demonstrate that WNBA players had options, that they could build their own league, control their own destiny, and create a sustainable business without depending on NBA subsidies. Instead, it's demonstrating the opposite. It's showing that without the WNBA's infrastructure, without the established fan bases of 30-year-old franchises, and without the one or two generational talents who actually drive casual viewership, women's professional basketball struggles to find an audience. That's not a popular thing to say. The mainstream media covering women's basketball has been reluctant to acknowledge these realities because they're invested in the growth narrative. They want women's sports to succeed, so they've been acting as promoters rather than journalists. They hype every positive development and downplay every concerning trend. But you can't downplay 100,000 viewers on TNT. You can't spin 30,000 people in the advertising demographic as anything other than a disaster. These numbers are so bad that even the most enthusiastic supporters of women's basketball have to acknowledge something isn't working. And here's the thing about media rights deals. They're based on projected viewership. Networks pay for content because they believe they can sell that audience to advertisers. If Unrivaled consistently delivers six-figure audiences when networks expected seven figures, the next media rights negotiation goes very differently. That $80,000 player salary disappears. The league contracts or folds entirely. Nafisa Collier and Breanna Stewart bet their reputations on this venture. They positioned themselves as business-savvy players who understood what it takes to run a sustainable league. They criticized the WNBA's business model while building their own alternative. And now their alternative is failing by every measurable metric that matters. The WNBA's CBA negotiations are happening right now. Players are demanding unprecedented revenue shares based on last season's ratings success. But those ratings were driven almost entirely by one player who isn't participating in Unrivaled. That's not speculation, that's what the data shows. Caitlin Clark's games averaged over 1 million viewers. Games without her averaged a fraction of that. Unrivaled without her can't crack 200,000 on a major network. So what does this mean for the CBA? It means players have far less leverage than they thought they had 6 months ago. It means owners can point to Unrivaled's failure as evidence that the market for women's basketball is smaller and more dependent on specific stars than players wanted to admit. It means the 60% revenue split players are demanding becomes much harder to justify when your co-founder's alternative league is hemorrhaging viewers. This is why conflicts of interest matter. Collier and Stewart are supposed to be negotiating on behalf of all WNBA players, but they're simultaneously running a business that competes with the WNBA for viewers, sponsors, and media attention. When that business fails, it doesn't just hurt them, It hurts every player whose salary depends on the WNBA's ability to argue they've built a valuable media property. And make no mistake, Unrivaled is failing. 110,000 viewers on TNT is a failure. 30,000 in the key demographic is a failure. Doing worse than the NBA pregame show is a failure. These aren't subjective assessments. These are objective measurements of audience interest, and the audience isn't interested. The question now is whether Collier and Stewart will acknowledge this reality or continue pretending their league represents a viable alternative to the W. Because every time they call Unrivaled sustainable while the ratings tell a different story, they undermine their own credibility. And credibility matters when you're trying to negotiate a CBA worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The WNBA owners aren't stupid. They're watching these numbers. They're seeing the same collapse everyone else is seeing, and they're adjusting their negotiating position accordingly. Why would you agree to give players 60% of revenue when their own alternative league can't generate enough interest to justify a cable television slot? This is the reality check nobody in women's basketball wanted to confront. The growth narrative was so appealing, so positive, that questioning it felt like rooting against progress. But Unrivaled just forced that confrontation. You can't ignore 100,000 viewers. You can't pretend that's sustainable. You can't use that as leverage in CBA negotiations. So here's what I think happens. Unrivaled limps through this season because they've already committed to paying players and broadcasting games. But unless something dramatically changes, unless they somehow find an audience in the next few weeks, this league doesn't survive to year 3. The math doesn't work. The ratings don't justify the investment. And the two founders who stake their reputations on this venture will have to explain how their sustainable business model collapsed in less than 2 years. Meanwhile, the WNBA's CBA negotiations get a lot more complicated. Players wanted to use Unrivaled as proof they had options. Instead, it became proof they don't. The leverage they thought they had evaporated the moment those ratings came out, and now they're stuck negotiating from a weaker position than they were in 6 months ago. All because 2 of their union representatives decided to launch a competing league that couldn't deliver an audience. That's the real story here. Not just that Unrivaled has bad ratings, but that those bad ratings fundamentally changed the economics of professional women's basketball at the worst possible time for players. They were supposed to be negotiating from a position of strength, riding the momentum of last season's success. Instead, they're explaining why their alternative league failed, while asking owners to give them a bigger piece of a pie that might not be as large as anyone thought. Tell me what you think this means for the CBA negotiations. Do players still have leverage, or did Unrivaled's collapse destroy their negotiating position? Drop your take in the comments, and if you made it this far, hit that subscribe button because we're going to keep following this story as it develops.